This is GovExec Daily, where we bring you the federal stories that really matter. It's April 8th, 2021. I'm Ross Fortuné. In mid-March 2020, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense issued a memo stating that Pentagon components could execute their pandemic plans at any time to ensure the ability to perform essential functions. The memo opened the door for telework for Defense Department feds if they were able to begin working from home. 5 months later, the Pentagon's Inspector General's office surveyed employees on their telework experiences. According to the respondents, DoD transitioned 88.2% of respondents to full or part-time telework from March 2020 through August 2020 during the pandemic. Of the more than 17,000 survey respondents who reported they still only worked remotely part of the time, more than a third said their office had split into teams who worked at their worksite in shifts to maintain distancing. Of the more than 56,000 employees surveyed, nearly 90% said that their shift to telework did not affect their productivity. The IG report noted that the rocky telework rollout caused some issues early in the pandemic, but the problems were solved by the time the survey was conducted in August. Joining me next to discuss the Pentagon IG report on telework will be GovExec reporter Erich Wagner. He covers the federal workforce beat, and he'll discuss the survey and other pay and benefit stories after a short break. Defense One and NextGov's annual Genius Machines series is back. Artificial intelligence has evolved from a staple of science fiction to a real-world strategic priority in the United States. On April 13th, virtually join government and industry AI experts as they explore all aspects of artificial intelligence and its applications in government. Register today at defenseone.com/events. That's defenseone.com/events. Like most federal agencies in March 2020, the Defense Department shifted to telework for its workforce due to the global novel coronavirus pandemic. Those who were able were told to work remotely. 5 months later, the Defense Department Inspector General's office conducted a survey of defense civilians on their telework experiences, and nearly 90% of those polled said that their productivity was not hurt by the shift to remote work. Erich Wagner covers the federal workforce for us here at GovExec. He joins the show now to discuss the Pentagon IG report on telework and other stories that he has been covering on his beat. Welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me.
All right, we just talked about the recent Pentagon IG survey about the telework situation at the Defense Department. What are kind of the top line numbers? What does the report say about productivity at that agency? And what do defense civilians think about telework?
So, as you mentioned, really the big top line number here was that, nearly 90% of people who were on telework found that they did their job as productively, if not more so. There was always this long running debate about how productive people could be working from home. And, this is just the sort of the latest piece of evidence that people can do their job at home just as well as they can in an office. Additionally, the Defense Department, had a sizable amount of people who were already working from home part of the time. And so what they saw was, the shift so that most people were working from home all the time. Although some component agencies, people had to, just because of the way they operate, they had to stay at part-time, and at those places they basically split their workforce into teams who would go to the office sort of in shifts. So, one day half the office stays home and the other half goes in, and then they would flip. One thing that the IG found, however, was that there were a lot of hiccups early on. You shift one of the biggest agencies in the federal government to full telework. Uh, that's a huge change in the network demands, with people having to sign in via VPN and things like that. So there were a lot of connectivity issues in the early days, although people said that by August most of that was cleared up. Apparently, a lot of the problems was specific to a few components in the Defense Department. I believe it was like the Defense Contract Management Agency, some of the armed services agencies like that. They apparently had not done their required telework exercises. Basically, the Defense Department had a pandemic flu like plan before all this started, and one of the tenets of that plan was that everyone would start to telework, but some of the agencies didn't test to see that they had the capacity ahead of time. So that's what sort of caused some of these issues that people saw. But as I said, apparently, by August, most of that had been fixed and everyone was working smoothly.
As we said, a lot about telework during the pandemic. Necessity was the mother of invention, I think, to a lot of ways. But it is interesting that the IG called out the lack of sort of testing and run throughs that other agencies in the government did. Famously, NASA, the week before or weeks before the maximum telework memo, basically ran a scenario of everyone teleworking, and they found the different choke points and whatever to make it so that NASA worked as productively from home. Does the IG report sort of talk about how telework evolved at defense since the pandemic began, and how does the idea see the kind of way from March to August that it got to where it is now?
Yeah, I mean, the big thing was the evolution in terms of uh, the IT infrastructure and making sure that everyone had uh, the the actual hardware that they needed. Most people had laptops. That was not a big deal. But early on in the pandemic, a lot of employees reported they were having to use their personal cell phones to make work calls, which is not really ideal if you're the Defense Department. Yeah, a lot of it seems like that also improved over the course of things. So yeah, most of the evolution seems to have been on the side of technology. Some people still have to go into the office occasionally because they have to get like physical documents from their office, or because they need to access classified systems, because obviously you can't have a skiff in everybody's home. But Defense Department seems to have made it work.
Yeah, I was a guest on a show that is hosted by a defense department. I believe she's a civilian, and that was something that she sort of talked about was she was getting to the point where she could work remotely, but she works with a lot of classified documents. So, to your point, she doesn't have a skiff in her home. God knows what her children would do to it. So, she was going down to the Pentagon, at least part time. Um, let's move on to a different big agency, adjacent, I guess. You had a story recently on the Veterans Affairs Department and its relationship with labor unions. What happened with VA and its contract with the American Federation of Government Employees?
So we should start by saying that the VA was sort of one of the sort of vanguards of the Trump administration's anti-union policies. Uh, the uh, you know the VA secretary, Robert Wilkie, at the time, you know controversially ruled that Title 38 employees, were the medical professionals, doctors, nurses, folks like that, could not use official time at all. He used this line in the law that spells out the VA's responsibilities, that says that uh, these employees can't bargain over things that are directly related to patient care. to say that, well, if you're taking time to work on grievances or do collective bargaining with us, um, you're that's taking you away from patients, and so we're just not going to let you do it. So, the relationship at VA might be as frayed, if not more frayed, than at any other agency. Uh, and the union ever since President Biden signed his executive order rolling back all of these Trump workforce policies, has been urging the VA to like come to the table and uh, rescind all of these policies. But the VA was basically said, well, we have to wait for guidance from our legal team and OPM, and so OPM finally put out that guidance last month, and then later last month, the VA sent a letter saying that they are rescinding uh, a variety of policies that were born out of the Trump administration's executive orders. Restoring official time to 2011 collective bargaining agreement levels, restoring access to parking, access to union access to office space. One of the really early hits that unions saw after the 2018 executive orders was that they were no longer allowed an office at federal facilities, or they would have to rent it, and they wouldn't be furnished with VA email and stuff like that. So that's all restored. One thing that hasn't happened is the VA Secretary Dennis McDonough has not reversed the Title 38 official time ruling yet. The union is hopeful that there will be something on that soon, but it's hard to say when that will happen or if that will happen. And they are still waiting for a resumption of negotiations on their next union contract. So that's where things stand now.
Moving, but not there yet, I imagine.
Yes.
So
The union described it as a good first step. So
that seems about right. Certainly from their perspective, and presumably from the ability to care for veterans and deal with all the various machinations of the Veterans Affairs duties. All right, we'll move on to this story that you had about last week. A group of lawmakers introduced legislation that would affect Fed's benefits on retirement. GovExec. We cover a lot about people who are ready to retire. Retirement planning is one of our more popular columns. So you have a story on the bill. Can you break it down for our listeners?
sure. So there is a rule in the tax code called the windfall elimination provision. Basically, for people who have worked in both government and the private sector, this reduces their Social Security benefits because to sort of account for the fact that they also have some sort of pension. This is fine for people in the civil service retirement system who have only worked in the federal government because they have pretty much full pension. But if they have spent part of their career in the private sector, they have been spending, they don't have as big of a pension as their full time, people who spent their whole career. They spent a lot of money in payroll taxes to go to Social Security when they were in the private sector. So the WEP sort of overcorrects for a lot of these people. And so organizations like NARFE, the National Active and Retired Federal Employees Association, have been pushing for the repeal of this provision. And there's, been some bipartisan support for this for several years now. So the Ways and Means Committee chairman in the House, Richard Neal, introduced a bill last week that would add sort of a second formula that would sort of more accurately calculate how much you put into Social Security versus how much you're getting in your pension. And under this, proposal, whichever amount of Social Security benefits is higher, either through that formula or after the windfall elimination provision, That's what you would get if you retire starting in 2022. It also provides, I believe, $150 a month in sort of cash payments to folks who are already retired and dealing with the WEP. NARFE, they are supportive of the bill, although they prefer a different bill that just gets rid of the windfall elimination provision altogether. That bill was introduced by Abigail Spanberger back in, I think, January. We've got sort of two different bills that are aimed at the same issue. I think they would be happy if either of them pass.
For sure, I'm sure that it'll gain or get them towards their goals sort of similarly. We'll finish up on an OPM note. You have a story on our site about the import of recent OPM appointments and what they mean to the role of the agencies. So, what are good government and labor experts saying about these appointments and sort of more bird's eye view? What do these appointments mean for the role of OPM going forward?
Sure. So, these are a number of sort of high-level staff appointments. There's some advisors to the OPM director who is not yet confirmed. There's one of the highlights is that they hired one of the top staffers at AFGE to run their congressional, legislative, and intergovernmental affairs office. It is a important change there in terms of it sends a signal that people with union backgrounds have a seat at the table in shaping personnel policy at the federal government. These are all political appointments, but good government groups say that these seem like highly qualified, good choices for their respective positions. I spoke with Don Kettle, who is a professor at University of Texas and follows all of this very closely. He said, he thinks that this is about as good a team as you could have to sort of deal with OPM's many challenges and sort of the need to adapt into a 21st century agency. As NAPA said in a recent study, they really need to move into a more strategic hub for federal personnel policy, as opposed to this sort of this agency that is very focused on compliance on a transaction by transaction basis. Kettle's question is, how well can they gel as a team to deal with these issues? Because he sort of sees this as OPM's last chance to prove itself to be what Congress wanted it to be when it first established the agency.
That seems like it's within the Biden kind of whole movement or whole agenda going forward. So it's in that sense, I imagine there's a lot of happy people in town about it. Eric, thanks for being on the program.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to GovExec Daily. Our show was produced by Adam Butler and hosted by me, Ross John Fortuny. We want to thank Erich Wagner for joining the program. Our music is the song Signals by Catfish Dancing. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe at Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. You can email us any feedback at podcast@govexec.com or hit us up on Twitter at GovExec. We'd love to hear from you. We'll talk to you later.